This is the Saturday supplement, version 2.0. What's crossing my mind right now is the question of comfort and discomfort, or confusion and clarity, and the elites and doomed cultures. So this is what comes up for me. This little thought. What is the distinguishing feature, the irreducible denominator, the factor, in my experience at least, that distinguishes between that segment of the population that we may in the vernacular refer to as the natural winners, those who are the natural winners, those who come out ahead. And be honest, there is a group that comes out ahead. There's a crowd that's out in front that lives life on their own terms, and they're doing something different. At least when we look at them, we think they're doing something different. We talk about them as doing things differently. But underneath their doing things differently, I believe they are thinking differently. They have very different beliefs and attitudes that motivate them. At least different from most of us. What might those beliefs be? It comes down to this. People who get ahead and people who maintain the lead ahead of the pack are people who don't mind discomfort. An elite of any culture that's a doomed culture, or a doomed elite, or a doomed class of people, are people who think in terms of comfort. They size up the world and their place in the world in terms of their sense of comfort. And they become very put out or offended if they're made uncomfortable. And I don't just mean physically comfortable. I'm also talking about psychological discomfort, perhaps even more than merely physical discomfort. And more significantly, I'm talking about psychological discomfort or intellectual discomfort. The person who gets ahead, the person who you might say is the person of power, is the person with a great capacity to be comfortable with discomfort. And a second phenomenon, I think, is also quite important. Someone who is very comfortable with confusion and very comfortable with indeterminacy. People who can handle discomfort, people who can handle psychological discomfort. And I think this turns into a certain behavioral attribute. I think this is a fundamental behavioral and attitudinal attribute I found. And that is this. Winners don't need to be liked. However, I've found that winners are very likable people. Not all of them. There are people who are just neurotic pains in the ass and are driven in flawed, deranged ways, and they are rather disgusting to be around. Such people exist, and some of them are very, very successful. Very driven, very ego-driven people, very difficult people to be around. But I'm talking about success in the larger sense. I think people who are successful in the larger sense are people who are able to withstand the discomfort of not being liked, yet they have very good social skills, and they have ethics and they have high quality beings, but they have them on their own terms. When I find people who think only in terms of comfort and become terribly upset and terribly annoyed and, I don't know, terribly puffed up with all their wounded self-importance when they're made to feel uncomfortable, or when someone argues against their point, or when some cherished belief or sacred cow of theirs gets skewered and deflates before their eyes, and just can't deal with it, I really don't think that person's going to become much of a success, because everything is framed in terms of comfort. A person who can handle discomfort, and a person who can handle indeterminacy, and a person who can handle multiple points of view, is someone who I think is very, very alive to the realities of the world, and very alive to the realities and the inner lives of the people around them. They're very sensitized to it. But they understand their place in relation. And I'm not saying it's necessarily an adversarial relationship, but it is a relationship of having a great deal of dignity and security in one's own imperfection, and one's imperfection of holding one's ground in a reasonable way. These people can handle discomfort. It doesn't really bother them all that much that they happen to be uncomfortable in the moment, especially if they happen to be intellectually uncomfortable. They can't make sense of things in the moment. Things are confusing to them in the moment. They feel that, or are these the people that feel that they are being made fools of? I don't know, I don't think it really bothers them that perhaps people are laughing up their sleeves at them, because they have a goal. They have something, they're shooting for something. They're shooting for something very clear and very definite. They know what they want. They have a way of clearly defining their missions. And they understand that between here and getting to your mission is going to be an awful lot of discomfort. That's why most people don't go there. They just don't want to deal with the discomfort. And the great lesson, I think, from this, the great inference we take from this, is that progress is often made by coming up against thousands of little discomforts. It's not always that you're up against one great dragon. It's that you are up against perhaps 10 or 100 little discomforts or little disagreeabilities or little things that you have to think past your limitations on every day. And it's that day in, day out, getting over your discomfort. That's the thing that makes the success, the obvious, evident success. It's the person who is constantly coming up against a boundary of discomfort and retreating because, I don't know, they don't want to go there. It brings up weird feelings. They feel threatened. They want to return right back to their secure sense of knowing exactly how things are and they should be. Well, that's the person who's going to constantly be replicating things as they remember them. Things they will be constantly recreating or constantly rebuilding the images and the thoughts and the theories of the past. So do learn to become comfortable and respectful and elegant in insecurity and uncertainty and discomfort. And that is a very powerful tool for real success in life.